Human history has also seen a time when, in the main square of cities, a machine for cutting off human heads was installed. Any person whose clothes carried a pleasant fragrance, whose dress looked new and elegant, or whose hands appeared soft, was made to pass through that machine. And all of this happened openly, in front of everyone. Today, we will talk about this very story and uncover the hidden truths of the French Revolution. So, let us move toward our story. The end of the 18th century. If there was a country that symbolized power, glory, and magnificence, it was France. The bright streets of Paris, royal ceremonies, and grand palaces seemed to announce the greatness of France to the world. But often, behind the brightest scenes, the darkness is just as deep. At that time, France was ruled by Louis XVI. He had inherited a royal tradition in which the king possessed absolute authority. The laws of the state, taxes, and all major decisions were controlled by the king and his court. The greatest center of royal luxury was the magnificent Palace of Versailles. This palace was not only a residence, it was also a display of power and wealth. Every day, royal ceremonies, feasts, and court rituals took place there. The clothes, jewelry, and celebrations of the nobles were so grand that an ordinary person could hardly even imagine them. It is said that one minister of that time lived such a luxurious life that he spent every night with 100 women for pleasure, and the next night there would be another 100 women. Meanwhile, the story in the villages and towns of France was completely different from the story of the nobles. Farmers worked day and night, but a large part of their earnings went away in taxes. Ordinary people had to pay many strange and unreasonable taxes. One of the most notorious taxes was the tax placed on salt, called the gabelle. Salt was a basic necessity of life. It was used to preserve food and for everyday cooking. But this tax made the lives of ordinary people even more difficult. Another strange thing about this tax was that anyone who had ever eaten salt in France could be forced to pay the salt tax at any time. Government officials sometimes even demanded this salt tax from women many times for their own immoral desires. The historian William Doyle from Britain writes in his book, The Oxford History of the French Revolution, France's financial system was not only unfair, but also so complicated that it created countless opportunities for corruption and bribery. The system of collecting taxes was so ineffective that the money was often divided among many hands before it even reached the royal treasury. The result was that the burden on the people kept increasing, while the financial condition of the state did not improve. In many places, tax collectors behaved harshly with the public. Sometimes, people were forced to pay bribes in addition to legal taxes, just to escape the cruelty of government officials. At the same time, wars and royal expenses weakened the state treasury even more. The historian Simon Schama from Britain writes in his book, Citizens, a Chronicle of the French Revolution. By the late years of the 18th century, the French economy had become dangerously weak, and the government was sinking deeper and deeper under the burden of debt. A strange contrast had appeared in France. On one side, there were lights, celebrations, and music in royal palaces. On the other side, in large parts of the country, there was hunger, despair, oppression, and a rising anger in the hearts of the people. This anger had not yet turned into a full rebellion, but history shows that when injustice grows too much, silence does not last for long. And in France, that moment was now getting closer, when the centuries-old system was about to collapse. Soon, the people were going to take a step that would not only shock the whole world, but also changed the destiny of France forever. Class, division, and inequality. The French kingdom looked like a beautiful and strong building, but in reality, its foundation was unstable. French society was divided into three major classes, known as the Three Estates. The first estate, the clergy, the religious class. This group was only about 2% of the population, yet it possessed enormous power and wealth. They owned large areas of land and were mostly free from paying taxes. Church leaders lived luxurious lives in their residences and also earned income from public lands. A shocking reality was that sometimes they would enter the homes of villagers and force them to pay taxes without their consent. The second estate, the nobility. This group was also around 2% of the population and usually consisted of landowners and military officers. Their privileges were no less than those of the clergy. Through legal authority, they could collect extra payments from workers on their lands. Some nobles even placed their own small military taxes on villages. And if a landowner refused to pay bribes, strict legal actions could be taken against him. The third estate, the common people. Then came the third class, the majority of the population. Farmers, workers, small traders, and city residents. They paid the highest taxes, but had the least power. Heavy taxes were imposed on them, including the notorious gabelle, the salt tax, and taille, a tax on land or income. The historian William Doyle writes, in the Oxford History of the French Revolution, the tax burden on the third estate was so heavy that people often had to borrow money just to meet their basic needs. In some areas, tax collectors were so cruel that they threatened villagers to force them to pay extra taxes. In some areas of Paris, workers had to stand in line in front of officials after finishing their work, just to submit their taxes. If someone arrived late or could not pay the required amount, they could face prison or heavy fines. These collective injustices slowly became the foundation of public anger. Small incidents, like fights over salt in villages, cruelty by tax collectors, and unfair financial demands by landlords, were lighting a fire in the hearts of the people. A fire that would soon set the entire country ablaze. The historian Simon Schama writes in Citizens, a chronicle of the French Revolution, "It was this inequality and the growing suffering of the people that pushed France toward the extraordinary revolution of 1789. The Third Estate remained silent until oppression and hunger finally broke their patience." The day of 14 July 1789 was not an ordinary day for the people of Paris. It became forever remembered in history because of a small fortress called Bastille. Bastille was officially a prison and a military fort, but in the eyes of the people, it had become a symbol of royal oppression and power. There were very few prisoners inside, yet its walls, cannons, and guards were enough to spread fear of the monarchy. Early in the morning, the streets of Paris were crowded and tense. Markets were closed, shops were empty, and people carrying sticks and hammers were moving toward the fortress. Fear and anger could both be seen on the faces of the people, but everyone shared one feeling: the desire to raise their voice against injustice. The first clash happened at the outer gate of the fortress. Some citizens tried to talk to the guards, but a gunshot was fired in response. Anger spread through the crowd like a wave. People moved forward. Some broke iron bars. Others tried to climb the walls. At the same time, the crowd attempted to enter the fortress, despite the thunder of cannons. It was a dramatic scene. People climbing walls, cannons firing, soldiers inside the fortress, desperately trying to defend it. Within a few hours, the fortress was captured. The people freed the prisoners of Bastille and arrested the officers of the fortress. This small fort, once seen as a symbol of royal power, had now become a symbol of the courage and strength of the people. This event was not just a public attack. It was the beginning of a new political reality. This small event became a spark for all of France, a spark that would soon ignite a fire across the country. Paris in 1792 was a city filled with crowds and unrest. On the faces of the people, there was fear, but also anger, and a desire for revenge. After the victory of Bastille, the people were now ready to directly challenge the power of the king. Crowds began moving toward the Palace of Versailles and the Tuileries Palace. Thousands of men and women, young people, and even children gathered at the gates of the palace. Inside the palace, royal guards and officers were frightened and confused. The speed of the public attack opened the way into the halls and rooms of the palace. Wherever the crowd reached, they captured nobles and royal officials and brought them before public courts. One of the most shocking scenes appeared in the public square, known as Place de la Révolution. There, a machine for cutting off human heads was installed, the guillotine. Any person whose clothes smelled of perfume, whose hands looked soft, or who appeared to belong to the elite class was made to pass through this machine. Everyone could see that the symbol of power was now teaching a lesson through blood. The streets, squares, and palace halls were filled with the sounds of shouting, fear, and chaos. This was the moment when the people made it clear that the power of kings and nobles was no longer beyond their reach. France, in 1799, after the violence, fear, and public rebellion of the Revolution, was facing a political vacuum. The memories of terror were still fresh, and people knew that freedom without stability was incomplete. At this moment, a young military leader appeared. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Through his military skill and political vision, he introduced new principles of law, military discipline, and strong central government. Napoleon united the trust of the people and the army to build a new France. France became a country where the power of the people was recognized. But strong military order and central government ensured that terror and uncertainty would not return again. The French Revolution did not only end the monarchy, it also transformed political power, social awareness, and the military system of the country. And the rise of Napoleon proved something important in history, that even after fear, chaos, and rebellion, hope and stability can still be created.